Today on the show, strategy plus action equals outsourcing your social media while still maintaining your voice. Great coaches and consultants like you have the ability to change people's lives and transform entire organizations. And your impact can often go far beyond the clients you work with. One of the reasons I love working with coaches and consultants is because of that ripple effect. This show is here to highlight your expertise and empower you with resources and new ideas to grow your business. Welcome to Strategy in Action. Becky Jolly is on the show today, and we have a blast talking about what she does so well for companies, and that's taking their social media and being that outsourced resource for them to really make sure that they have a consistent and high quality image out there and message and voice out on the internet in multiple different channels. That may be LinkedIn for her B2B clients, maybe Facebook, Instagram, but making sure that, number one, it's not generic content, right? That we see so much. And I think a lot of us think of when we think, outsourcing our content. And on the other end though, too, it's not Becky's voice. It's not her company, Elephant Key Marketing. It's not their voice. They do a fantastic job of, when a client comes on board, really digging in and understanding what that client is all about. And that may come from, an existing brand voice that they mimic, enhance, and put out in terms of the messaging and content that they put out. Sometimes it's having that first conversation that a company has ever had about brand voice and being intentional with what they put out there. Either way, Becky and her team go in there and do a phenomenal job of bringing in a system to approach social media, which, again, a lot of companies just don't have. They do it when they think about it, or they hand it off to, an employee who has 6 other jobs and is trying to get to it when they can, and allows them to really put in a process in place, again, to bring that consistency and quality at the same time. So this is a fantastic conversation about outsourcing content, social media, those things that you need to have out there, but maybe you're concerned with how your brand will be perceived once you do this. So I think you'll love this episode so much. Let's jump in. Becky Jolly, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
We're gonna have a blast. Whether you like it or not, we're gonna have fun.
I'm gonna.
That's what I say. That's my motto in life. Having fun, whether you like it or not.
Jason, how many of your friends are like, listen, fun is just not for me?
Friends? Friends? I don't.
That
I'm gonna make one of those one day.
That checks out.
Well, I'm really glad to have you here. I want to dig in with this topic, of course, something that you're so good at, which is taking over people's social media, not like in a hacker kind of way, but with their consent, take over their social.
Yeah,
put out
actually,
great content.
often they request it. Even it's just a direct ask. I know, and frankly, I feel like I should be in charge of a lot of things. So this is phase one.
Yeah, this is phase one of world domination.
Yeah. It's baby steps,
Kim Jong Jolly.
We'll work on the title later. Okay, I don't know if I'm married to that. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. But before we kind of dig into that, I want to give folks a little bit of geography on who the heck you are and your company, Elephant Key Marketing, and all that fun stuff. Because I know you. It wasn't like I sat down one day and decided I'm going to do social media for everybody. Like you sort of evolved into it and like, okay, this is rocking. This is cool. Even though you jumped into it, or if it was thrust upon you, but it's great. So give folks a little bit of geography there.
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, I kind of did just one day jump into it. I got a job as an office manager for a local business, and I wanted the job because the job description said copywriting, and I was prior to that had worked in a lot of different sales roles and sales positions, and I kept getting in trouble when I was doing those jobs for working on marketing projects. essentially like I'd be like making a flyer or like, doing something with like the PR department or something. I kept getting in trouble for that. So I was like, I should get a job in copywriting. And my degree is in advertising, so I had some experience with that a little bit. That was like 200 years ago. But yeah, so I got the job because I took it because it had the word copywriting in the job description, and then it was just kind of your basic office manager job. We resold tickets for concerts and sporting events and stuff like that. And my boss liked my personal Facebook page, thought my posts were good. So he's like, here you go. Here's the Twitter login. And then at some point where they were just like, yeah, we should just let her do all of it. So I taught myself how to do social media content marketing. And about 2 years later, I found another marketing job that was definitely more, content development, email, social media, landing pages, assets, deliverable, stuff like that. And again, it was a really tiny agency, and we worked mainly with managed service providers for technology solutions. So just the sexiest content you can imagine. And and again, there were 3 of us on staff. So I was kind of doing all of that copywriting and content writing, and it kind of evolved from there into this is something I'm really good at. And it was just one of those like fun things where you just learn like I see the world in social media posts. And so it's just I tripped into it. Here we are.
You stumble into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And so with that company, they at some point were just like, listen, we're not going to be doing as much content development as a part of our strategy. They want more kind of high level with things. And so they were like, okay, we're going to switch you from being an employee. So I was just a salaried employee to a 1099. P.S. Here's a book of business. Here are all the clients that you're doing the fulfillment for. Here's your book of business. So honestly, it was just kind of like I was the baby bird, and they just shoved me out of the nest. And I got real close to the ground a couple of times, but I, pulled back up. And here we are, 7 years later.
Oh yeah, but that really is good. I mean, you wouldn't have designed it that way, most likely. Many of us wouldn't. But thank goodness, right? Like that, it's such a. Looking back, I mean, what a great way to start. Even though,
oh my God, yeah. I mean, who else is so fortunate when they start their business and they're like, listen here, like I took a job 3 months before kind of my start date, my end date with the company. I took a job delivering pizzas at night because I was terrified. And then I remember because I started January, like the first week in January. And then by just after Valentine's Day, I quit that job because I was too busy. I, was exceeding my revenue goal by 25%, kind of within about 10 weeks or so. So, I mean, I was just beyond fortunate. So my boss is now a mentor and friend, and she's still a client to this day. And some of the clients that I had at that point, I'm still friends with, still do work with, still do projects with. So, I mean, I've been very, very blessed to have good people in my life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it is something that's maybe not, I guess people hear the story that sounds like a happenstance story. It kind of was in your situation, but that's also the other takeaway though, is that you can, that's a great way to purposefully go into entrepreneurship, right? If you want to transition, you've got this full-time job. I've heard similar stories. It's great to have this concrete one though, that, I'm going out on my own, boss. I'd love to have you as a client, right? Yeah. Because they do, whether somebody's consulting or, I've heard that story a lot, that they become, consultants to the business that they just left because they were valuable enough.
Yeah.
There's still enough value, and it can become a win-win.
So, and this happens a lot. I hear this story a lot from clients now, and I believe it because I experienced it. When I was doing my job, the customer fulfillment, customer service side of my job and the office management side of my job often took 8-9 hours in a day. And then at night at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night at home by myself, I would be still doing the social media marketing because that's what I loved. And so that was a big part of it too. Is it's really what do you want to do at 8 o'clock at night? And it kind of reminds me of that there's this great quote, and I'm gonna butcher it, from Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters. And he's like, if this hadn't worked out, like this, multi-platinum, mega successful band, he's like, we'd all still be doing this, but we'd have like crappy day jobs while we did this at night. And so that, to me, like, this is really where, like, you kind of see and you know what you're supposed to be doing, because it's the thing that you are going to do at 7 o'clock at night. You're going to teach yourself and watch videos on the weekend to learn how to do it. When I started, I mean, honestly, that was 11 years ago. Like, the amount of information about, like, we're all kind of like, social media marketing, that's novel. Maybe we should try it, So it's very different than it is today. But yeah, it was a really cool journey. So, and I'm glad to be here.
Just finding those indicators, because a lot of folks are trying to find it. They know they kind of want to jump and do their own thing, and that's a great indicator. But yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on, is to talk about this idea of outsourcing your social, outsourcing your content. I think I know in the past, my head has gone to just the most generic stuff. If a company is outsourcing that, sometimes if they're doing it internally, sadly, but if they're outsourcing that, it's just, how could they possibly really get a unique voice in there, and craft those messages that are custom to that audience? Because we've all seen the generic stuff. Happy Thanksgiving, that you couldn't for 1 second distinguish this page from a company to that page from another company. And that's where my head goes when I think outsourcing that. It's just checking a box, and we have to have it out there. And something I've learned from, just our discussions and how you're helping different companies is that that's the bad version. They're certainly out there. But that's not what we do. And so talk about that process a little bit, and how you kind of fight that, both in terms of first getting the word out that, hey, everybody, we can do this for you in a way that still feels like you, but then in some of the steps of that process.
Yeah, it's definitely a fair and valid concern, right? Because part of marketing is not sounding like everybody else. And you want to have a different, unique voice, and you want to talk about your unique selling points and pain points and benefits. And so it's a valid concern. I think there's a couple of different things. One, for me, it's just what I'm obsessed with. I work in a lot of industries that are more dry. And so I get really interested in just learning about the industry, learning about the job, learning about all of the different pieces of it that make it happen. So like my friend and I were on a road trip, and I have a client that works in asphalt and concrete testing. And my friend and I were on a road trip, and he was like, I wonder where the road's pink right here. And I gave him like a 10-minute lecture about how you source the aggregates as close to the road as you possibly can to reduce the carbon emissions. But I get geeked out on everything, and I love learning how to kind of one of the phrases that I use often is transpose. Like, how do I transpose dry, unique, brand-specific, company-specific information into something that's accessible and interesting in like popcorn-sized bites?
Is it part of it too of kind of the human part of it a little bit too in some of these industries? Like, because you have to think, a human is going to make a decision, even if they're working for a government agency and they're in charge of this, there's still a person there that you can grab their attention in a way that makes them
absolutely. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, because I always remember that, because the phrase B2B, and that's kind of where my sweet spot has always been, is B2B, just because of the jobs that I got. But in B2B, it's not really business to business. It's still a person to a person, right? So you're just looking at kind of different pain points, different benefits, different outcomes, different emotions that people feel, right? So instead of, feeling sad in like a personal relationship, and you want to get this product to help you feel better. So if you're selling deodorant, I'd be like, listen, you're going to feel better in your interpersonal relationships. In a B2B setting, it's still a person, but they might feel frustrated with their job. They might feel like they are spending too much time on a task. They might feel insecure about their position and how well they're performing, things like that. And so you just have to identify, we're still a person, what pain points and what problems are we solving from a person, right? The company and the people that work there to a person, the people and the company and the people that work there. And so one of the things that I do is so dorky, but I literally will go through the business's website when I first start working with them, and I copy paste their website. And especially it's great if they have content, if they have blogs, if they have assets, things like that. I copy paste it into a text analyzer, and we make a word cloud of their text that they use, so we can use kind of the same phrases and the same terms that they use. And then a lot of it also comes from interviews. It comes from any communication that I can have with the company and just narrowing in on that. It depends on the business and how big they are. So corporate is a little bit different than, let's say, if I was Tony Robbins, everything would have to sound really specifically like Tony Robbins if I were writing for Tony, which I'm not. Tony, it's kind of rude, but it's fine. But everything would have to be really specific for Tony Robbins, right? But for a company, what happens a lot, and this is a really healthy process, is that my team and their team shape the communication a little bit as we go. We're going to shape that tone. We're going to shape the brand voice. And so part of, I think, the benefit of coming in as a as a layman in a lot of these industries is if I don't understand a piece of the pie, then it's very possible that the audience is not going to understand it. So the more I can understand it and like just filter it through my own process, the better. And it just helps clarify those things that, maybe people in the industry might take for granted, but need to be explained a little bit further or fleshed out a little bit. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Like we together kind of develop this communication style, and then it feeds into some of their other marketing that they do, and then what their marketing, their other marketing feeds into what we do. So it's a process for sure.
Yeah, and I imagine for a lot of these companies, especially again, more B2B, more dry, it's probably the first time they've ever thought about their brand
Yeah.
voice. Like that's probably
Yeah.
a conversation they never had,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times I'll come in and I'll say like, okay, just send me whatever style guides you have, and they look at you like you have three heads, or I wish we had a style guide.
Yeah, and then you have a kind of a third layer a lot of times because you work with agencies. So you're actually doing the social for the clients of that agency.
Yeah.
And I imagine that has another layer, certainly of complexity, maybe in communication sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, it's sometimes the agency is building that brand voice for them, or they're doing some other component, which probably makes the whole thing a lot better because they're already in that mindset, and you can come in and again kind of influence, talk, follow whatever that agency needs.
Ideally, yes, they have the brand voice and they hand it to me, and I kind of look at my role when I'm working with agencies on behalf of their clients and we're doing their client work for them. I look at my role as to kind of be as an extension of the agency as opposed to my own agency, right? So we try really hard to just do everything that we can without having to involve the people. Because I think we've all, every entrepreneur's experienced this, is you've hired somebody to do something and then your workload increases instead of decreases. Right? You have to do like so much extra work. And so my job, I always have felt like, is to come in and be an extension of the team. And I come in and I take ownership of that piece. So I really do own the social media for those clients. And the less I have to go to my direct report or to my, the person that I'm working with, the better. Kind of. So I do as much as I can. And that's where we started with the whole text analyzer, word cloud. That process was kind of born out of not wanting to have to rely on my person. I wanted to kind of be as independent as possible to take stuff off of their plate, not add to it. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting, and I do this a lot, is that I don't have a particularly what I'm going to call academic background in writing. So my degree is in advertising, and copy and content has kind of always been my sweet spot, but I take a lot of it from like pop culture and references and quotes and things like that. And it doesn't work for every industry. We always try to be as professional as we can and sound human, but there's a lot of really fun ideas that you can get from like watching TikTok and from reading, romance novels. And like there are communication ideas everywhere if you're looking for them. And then if you can be funny and interesting and humanized in the B2B space, you stand out so much. So I think it's really helpful that I come at it from a perspective of just trying to be more relatable, and more fun and hip, as the kids say.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I think it shines in social media, because we're used to seeing that there. And if you wrote, a social post on Instagram that read like a white paper, you know, the company may like, oh, yay, but
Yeah.
the audience sure isn't,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's that piece. That's the magic, right? Like that's when you can take and deep dive, like you talk about doing, know that product, that industry inside and out from that company, how that company works in it, and then bring in the human,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
start to build that in. That's quite a skill.
Another thing that I do, and this is definitely, I think unique to some degree, is that I do improv. It's been a hobby of mine for almost as long as I've been in business for myself. So for 6 years, I've been doing improv, um, which I think is everybody's favorite form of comedy. But that also I think is really helpful, and it does a bunch of different things that are fun. So one, you learn about characters, and so sometimes to me, kind of figuring out who the brand is like, what is their character? And like, building their unique character and like, okay, if this were a person, what would they say? How would they sound? How would they react to things? So that's been really helpful, I think, in adopting kind of that and maybe turning it into kind of a shortcut to some degree of just being able to like put my head in the right headspace. But then it's also like a big piece of improv is listening and like having good listening skills. So that's been really helpful too in terms of like listening to the client, what they want. And then also just being able to be a little bit funny at a tiny like piece of wit, a tiny joke, a tiny like wink in the content. And that's been very helpful as well.
Just the slightest bit of that in the B2B world, like you have
Yeah.
opportunity to stand out like crazy.
You're
And
streets ahead.
yeah, exactly. And I think the other uh, the negative that people can think of when it comes to outsourcing their content, something like social media, video, any of it that's outsourcing their something that has their voice, it can go the complete opposite of worrying about generic and worry that it's just going to sound like that person they're hiring,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
whoever they're doing. and
Yeah.
and I love that. Obviously, the way you've explained this process, it addresses that just as much.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's something that's really purposeful in your approach too. So it's not Becky's take on the concrete industry.
Well, and something else that we've done that's been really helpful, and I've started this in the last 6 months to a year, is that I've also created kind of my own lexicon of types of social media posts that we do, and I have kind of created formulas for those posts. And actually, so you think that having a formula makes everything sound the same, and what it does, and I've always found this like it's so interesting to me. The more structure you have, the easier it is to be creative, in my opinion, because you're not coming from a place of I can do anything from, any perspective. It's like, okay, here's the structure. How can we write about this topic within this structure? And then to me, it just kind of frees up your brain a little bit because you're not thinking about everything. You're thinking about like what your exact specific task is. So we created a bunch of formulas. And so all we have to do then is apply the messaging for the client to the formula. And then we have a social media post.
Having those constraints, like that's where
Yeah.
creativity really thrives.
I don't know if you ever do this in your day, but I put what I call anchor points in my day often. So if you have 8 hours as an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur who was undiagnosed with ADHD, but having if you have an 8 hour day, you're like, okay, I have to do these things, and it's going to take you 8 hours. But for me, I found that having that structure and those like constrictions in place helps me be so much more productive. So if I have, okay, I have a call at this time with someone. I'm making an appointment with myself to go to the gym at 2. I'm going to, I improv at at 6:30. So I have to be done by then. Like putting those kind of anchor points throughout the day of like knowing I have to be done with this amount of stuff in a very small period of time helps me to be so much more productive. And I think it's just the same thing. Like putting those like structures in place is really helpful for creative work.
So when a company's wanting to do this, what's kind of step one, or what should they be looking for when they decide, okay, I need help with this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So bringing people in is always a process. So they're just kind of know that there's a little bit of a process involved. So what you really want to find is somebody who's used to that process and has systems in place to be able to help you through it, right? You're looking for someone who is going to take ownership of that piece of the puzzle for you and kind of walk you through what that looks like and then be the person leading in that area, right? Because first of all, you want somebody who's done it a lot before, so it's not a learning curve for both of you, right? And then second of all, you want somebody who just really has that system and that science down, because the last thing we want to be doing as business owners all the time is always having to lead every piece of the project, right? So that happens a lot when we're the owner, or when we're in management or leadership. We become the person who kind of always has to lead everything, and then the best thing in the world is to find somebody who has a process for that, who knows what questions to ask and tell you, okay, this is our 4-step process for onboarding. This is what it's going to look like. You want someone who is going to come to the table with ideas for you. So they're not asking you what do you want us to post about, right? So if you hear that question, run, because they should come to the table knowing, okay, they have an idea in the back of their mind. They've already done some research. If you're working with them, they're doing the research on their end. They're doing the groundwork. And they might bring you in for really specific questions, but it's never going to be general, like, what do you want to post about? And then you want somebody who is going to, so I love the phrase scavenge. I call my team master scavengers, because we go and we look for the smallest little bites of content that we can find and figure out how to turn those into the strategy. So you want somebody who can scavenge and can come up with some really fun, unique, interesting angles and interesting ideas from the information that's already available. And then somebody who also knows when to ask for what they need, right? Because that was hard for me for probably the first 5-ish years of being in business, was like asking the client for stuff. Like a lot of times you bring somebody on, especially, somebody like a VA, you bring them on and you get all the questions. I had a hard time going to the client with questions. So you want somebody who knows when to ask for what they need, how to time it out, and then just coming up with like a process and a system for sharing that, right? So maybe they have folders set up, they know timelines for things and stuff like that. So it's just very organized and systematized, and you just kind of fill in the blanks for them.
Yeah, I think that's a key distinction, and there's a nice blend too, because that question as a business owner to ask whoever you're bringing on, what's the process? I mean, that's a great one, right? They should be, certainly they should have attracted you in with the benefits of hiring and outsourcing and all of that stuff, and they can speak to that. That's great. But now when you're in a call as a business owner to go, awesome, what's the process? And if they go, here it is. We make these social posts for you. Cool, bro.
Yeah.
What's the process
Yeah.
of going about that?
Yeah.
And don't let them get away with just, well, here's our deliverables. That's great. How are we getting there?
Right. And how much of my time am I going to be investing in getting to that point? Right. Because at some point, it's not a benefit for you. If you're still putting 5 or 6 hours a week into content, then there's no benefit.
Defeats the purpose.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So they should know what the process is, and they should have some ideas and come to the table with a few ideas. There's some types of content that are just kind of universal, right? So Meet the Team would be a good example of a universal piece of content. It works across so many industries. It works from B2B to B2C. And so they should come to the table with just kind of a laundry list of things that they're wanting to implement as a part of your social media strategy. And then they're getting a little bit of feedback, a little bit of input from you in terms of if you have things that you need to share. But they already know, this is how we're going to do the outline. This is how we're going to write the captions. This is how long everything's going to take. And I always like to also explain how long the onboarding process takes. And really what the clients always want to know is, okay, from today to what date? How many weeks is it going to be? How many days is it going to be until we are live and we have content on social? So they should be able to answer that for you too. How long is the process going to take? When are we going to start seeing results? What metrics should we be looking at? Is that something that you provide? Do you do analytics? What platforms we should be on. So they should be able to kind of be the expert and come in and just be that leader of that owner of that piece of it for you.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's a blend in the sense that you also don't want this is what we do. This is the post we're going to make. This is what we're happening. This is step, in terms of here's your content, right? Because that's going to get into, the generic side of things. That's going to get into, like, well, we do this every day and this is what you're going to get. And like, oh, hold on.
Well,
now.
actually, so I don't agree with you, actually. I think they should come in the door with like, these are the posts that we're going to do. This is what I recommend. Now,
I think recommendation, not from like, this is the creative, this is everything about it. Like they shouldn't know completely what they should do. And but it's also how you come at the table with that. You should have an arsenal. And if you are dealing with a client who's brought you in and they're just like, I don't even want to have this conversation, just go handle it. Yeah. Cool. Got it.
Yeah.
But you also need to come with that energy of, hey, we're here for you. Oh, you have feedback on this, this, and this. You need adjustment there. Rocking. Like, let's take that in and let's do it.
One of my favorite quotes is that you get the car moving and then you steer, right? So I will never in my career walk in the door and have a perfect content mix for a client the first time we've ever done anything together. You look at their past posts, you look at all of their information that's available online, you look at their website, you look at all of those things, and you make recommendations, and then you see what works and you adjust. So absolutely, you want to come to the table. You want your team to your social media consultant to come to the table and have those recommendations. You want to give them feedback and have them listen to your feedback, because I feel like how those people come in and you give them feedback and they turn the exact same thing into you time after time. And then you want them to come to the table also with changes based on what's working and then what needs to be adjusted.
I love it. I think we've painted a good picture here, but who is that ideal person, business owner, company that, needs your help right now? And how do they get it?
That's a great question. Let's talk more about me. So right now we are focusing on marketing agencies that already exist. They have their client base, they have their team set up, but they're a little bit on the small side. And they don't have a social media resource. So it's typically an agency that's going to have about 5 or so employees. And they have a great copywriter on staff, but the copywriter is doing the exact same thing I had to do when I was first starting working in social media, and they were writing the email campaigns and landing pages and web content and all that stuff during the day. And then at the end of the day, they're like, oh, we put on social. And you're tapped, you're burnt out. So they have copy on staff. They have probably a creative team on staff, but they just don't have the bandwidth for social. And they know their clients need it. They know their clients want to be on social media marketing, but they just don't want to do it. So then we come in and we help those agencies. We bring ideas to the table. We set up our system. We set up our process. And then you wake up every day and there's going to be social media content that's been posted for your client. And it's literally never anything you have to think about.
Fantastic. How do they find out more and get in touch?
Oh, okay. So they should go to socialhandoff.com and fill out my form. And I promise it's not one of those forms where it's not one of those places on the internet where your information goes to die. I know so many people you'd rather chew your arm off and fill out an online form. So socialhandoff.com, learn more about what we do, how the process works, because we have one of those. And then, we'll be in touch to talk about that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I dig it. Thanks so much for being on and sharing all this, because I think it's very needed and brings a lot of relief to business owners.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that so many business owners, they know they need it, and they would rather lose a limb than have to write their own social media content. And honestly, it's our favorite thing to do every single day. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yay,
And
thank
we will
you.
see all of you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of this show. If you want help creating authority building video content or even a client generating show of your own, go to MediaLeadsCo.com and let's connect. I'll talk to you soon on the next Strategy in Action.
This show is powered by Media Leads. To get your next great podcast produced, go to MediaLeadsCo.com.